Hi, I'm Marc, and on this channel I talk about Brexit and UK politics. And 3.5 years after Brexit, the majority of Brits wants a rapprochement, but the EU has come to terms well with the status quo. But government debt in Great Britain has continued to rise since Brexit, most recently reaching over 100% of gross domestic product for the first time in 62 years, and inflation has grown massively, so I understand the people in the UK. The exit from the European Union is proving to be an ever greater burden on the national economy. Less than 4 years after Brexit, it is there now the greatest regret, the so-called regret. But will Great Britain become a debt-ridden state, and how do Europeans view the island from the continent now? With Brexit, people have decided to put sovereignty above economic considerations, at least the majority of those going to vote that day. And we can now see what consequences this has and what costs it causes. By leaving the European Union, the British have decided to withdraw from a large integrated market. Now, all the consequences that economists predicted are happening. The economy is not doing very well, the pound is weakening and debts are rising. Experts are convinced that these problems on the island will only increase. As a comparatively small country with limited resources, Great Britain can hardly keep up with global competition in terms of industrial policy. And experts believe that Great Britain will distance itself more and more from the European Union in the coming years, even if this harms the country's economy. The desire for political independence and a move away from a common line, for example in climate policy, is already evident there. And in terms of foreign policy, the focus is even more on the USA than before. There are delicate signs of newly burgeoning friendship in European-British relations, though. At the beginning of September, Great Britain returned to the European research community and has since then again taken part in collaboration within the framework of Horizon Europe after a lot of talking. And the British are also once again taking part in the Earth observation program Copernicus, which provides satellite-based data on environmental and security problems. As the EU Commission emphasizes, they also pay for it, an average of 2.6 billion euros per year. If you consider that Boris Johnson advertised on a red bus during the Brexit campaign that he could save £350 million a week by leaving, then around 14% of that is now flowing back into the malign bureaucratic coffers in Brussels, just to regain access to the European scientific community receives. The dream of an exclusive axis between London and Washington has shattered in post-Brexit years, as has the revival of the Commonwealth. Great Britain has learned the hard way that without the economic power of the EU behind it, it no longer plays a role in global politics as before and has nothing to gain economically. The sobering realization is increasingly reflected in surveys. According to a recent survey by the Tony Blair Institute, and yes, I know what some will say, 18% of those who voted for Brexit in June 2016 regret their decision 7 years later. In a new referendum, only 34% of Brits would vote for leave. An impressive 78% of voters want closer cooperation, while the figure for Brexiteers is 71% already. Nevertheless, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak cannot pursue the rapprochement offensively if he does not want to be branded a traitor by his own party's backbenchers. Opposition leader Keir Starmer has significantly more legroom, but he's not giving details either. The Labour leader visited Europol in The Hague in September to explore possibilities for closer cooperation on cross-border crime and on police data sharing. If Labour comes out on top in next year's general election, the way would be clear for a more EU-friendly course, especially since the possible coalition partner, the Liberal Democrats, if they need one, is openly advocating re-entry. Nevertheless, Starmer is also reluctant to show too much enthusiasm for the European project. He wants to win back the constituencies in the remote north and in the former industrial centres in the midwest of the island that were lost to the Conservatives in 2019 because of a pro-European election campaign on the Labour side. There, the Leave campaign had many supporters who blamed all the evils of globalization and structural change on the evil bureaucrats in Brussels. Although they are feeling the economic consequences of the withdrawal particularly hard and therefore want economic relations to be revived, they certainly do not want to return to the fold of the EU. Experts estimate that 5.5% of economic growth has been lost in Great Britain due to laborious new border clearances, companies planning uncertainty, labour shortages, and of course a higher inflation than in other places. Investments and exports would be 10 to 15% higher if the country had remained in the EU. And the war in Ukraine, the Russian disinformation campaign, and attacks on critical infrastructure are also creating a feeling of increasing insecurity and a desire to rely on strong allies. Since the advantages have met with little approval from his big brother, the USA, Sunak is increasingly looking to join forces with his European counterparts in crisis diplomacy. They welcome him back into their midst with goodwill, as they like to act in foreign policy to the exclusion of the European institutions anyway. But that doesn't mean that Britain joining the customs union or even rejoining the internal market would be just as easy. Both are being discussed in Great Britain, but are not currently an issue in the EU. The state capitalist wing of the EU under French leadership has gained significant weight as a result of Brexit. Presumably, the more liberally oriented northern countries and Germany would very much welcome a return of the British. But that would require lengthy and painful negotiations in which freedom of movement for workers and migration policy would be put to the test again. It is not only on this issue that the EU is so divided internally that it would probably not be able to cope with such a grueling process at the moment. That means that arch-Brexiteer Nigel Farage is still panicking at the moment, but he can leave it. He says the Labour Party is considering a security pact with Brussels, and military exercises in Cadiz could signal Britain's role in a potential EU army, as Nigel Farage warns. The Labour Party would plan to enter into this security pact with Brussels when they win. And in this context, both Nigel Farage and Tory Brexit MPs are warning against footage showing the EU's first official military exercises in Cadiz in Spain. According to the Daily Express, yes, I know, this was the first time that member states had been officially invited to take part in such an exercise on EU stationery. Despite the formal nature of this exercise, it has not yet been officially designated as an EU army, according to the Daily Express. However, it represents the biggest step yet towards an official EU military force. Well, I have an EU channel, I will tell you when this happens. But this has raised new concerns about Labour's plan. David Lammy, Labour's shadow foreign secretary, confirmed the plan during a party conference in Liverpool. Not the EU army one, the other. The plan would further integrate the UK into the EU's military structures. Following this revelation, there are fears that the Labour Party intends to integrate Britain into an EU army, at least according to the Daily Express. The country already has alliances through NATO and the Permanent Structured Cooperation PESCO to facilitate the deployment of the British military in Europe. Nigel Farage commented to the Daily Express that what was seen in the footage was the next step towards an EU army and that developments in this direction were accelerating. The UK's decision to leave the EU, commonly known as Brexit, has been a controversial topic since the referendum in 2016, and Nigel Farage is keeping that alive. But while some argue that the UK's departure has weakened the EU, others believe that the EU is indeed better off without the UK. The UK's departure from the EU has had significant impact on both sides, of course. While there are potential downsides to the UK's absence, there are also several reasons why some believe the EU is better off without the UK. The UK had often been a dissenting voice within the EU, opposing further integration and seeking exemptions from various policies. Its departure has lessened internal disagreements and allowed the EU to move forward with greater cohesion. The UK's absence has strengthened the EU's unity by removing a member that was often seen as obstructing progress. This has fostered a stronger sense of common purpose among the remaining 27. Without the UK's divergent interests, the EU can now prioritize its own agenda, such as deepening integration within the Eurozone and strengthening its global position. Brexit has prompted the EU to re-evaluate its structure and policies, opening up opportunities for reforms that could make the Union more efficient and responsive to its members' needs. The UK's departure also has reinforced a sense of European identity among the remaining members as they reaffirm their commitment to the EU's shared values and goals. The UK's political and economic challenges, such as the Scottish independence movement and the economic impact of Brexit, are no longer a direct concern for the EU, allowing it to focus on its own stability and growth. While the UK departure has undoubtedly created some challenges, especially for the UK, it has also presented the EU with an opportunity to reassess its direction and strengthen its unity. The EU can now focus on its own priorities and move forward with greater cohesion and shaping its future without the constraints of accommodating a reluctant member. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.